Back. I hope everyone missed me. So, we are going to do something a little new tonight. I'm going to read some news articles and talk about them. You may agree, you may disagree, but at any rate, I would love to hear what you think. I am currently looking at the chat room for Twitch. So, if you're on any other platform, I'm not going to see the stuff that you're saying. I am Ben KZN on Twitch. I'd love to see your comments over there. And one of these days, I'll figure out how to look at multiple chat windows all at the same time, but I am still getting the hang of this. I think I need to get some audio going on. One moment. There's the background music. And let's paste. There we go. That didn't have the music on. All right, so let me turn this down a bit. All right. So, first article we have tonight is about the Key Bridge collapse. If you are not aware, several weeks ago, a huge bridge in Baltimore, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, collapsed when a huge ship ran into it. Now, the overall narrative that's been presented has been this was just a freak accident, and there's no way anyone could have anticipated that this would happen. My gut reaction when this first happened is that this was some sort of attack. I don't want to say that it's a terrorist attack. I don't know enough to say. But I do know that, hundreds of ships come in and out of ports all over the United States every day. And this is the first time I've ever heard of any sort of bridge being run into by a random ship. Like, something like this feels intentional. So it's really interesting that... Oh, wait a minute. Okay, the headline is different. That's what caught my interest. Okay, so the URL is Baltimore Bridge Collapse FBI Investigation. And investigation is misspelled for the record. So the headline, ship that caused bridge collapse had apparent electrical issues while still docked, AP source says. And you know what? I do not like this music in the background, so gonna turn it off. It's just you and me. By Eric Tucker, Sarah Brumfield, and Leah Skeen. Updated 7 o'clock, April 15th. Baltimore. Hours before leaving port, the massive container ship that caused the deadly collapse of a Baltimore bridge experienced apparent electrical problems, a person with knowledge of the situation told the Associated Press on Monday. The same day, FBI agents boarded the vessel amid a criminal investigation into the circumstances leading up to the catastrophe. The Dolly, which is the container ship that ran into the bridge, departed Baltimore's port early on March 26th, laden with cargo destined for Sri Lanka. It lost power before reaching open water and struck one of the supports for the Francis Scott Key Bridge, causing the span to collapse into the Patapsco. I thought I was going to say it right. Into the Patapsco River, and sending 6 members of a rogue repair crew plummeting to their deaths. 2 of the victims are still unaccounted for. That's really sad. Authorities announced Monday evening the recovery of a 4th body from a construction vehicle in the underwater wreckage. The person's identity wasn't released per their family's request, officials said. While the ship was docked in Baltimore, alarms went off on some of its refrigerated containers, indicating an inconsistent power supply, according to the person with knowledge of the situation, who was not authorized to publicly comment and spoke to the AP on condition of anonymity. Officials with the National Transportation Safety Board have said their investigation will include an inquiry into whether the ship experienced power issues before starting its voyage. Board Chair Jennifer Homendy said last week that the investigation is focused on the ship's electrical system generally. The ship experienced power issues moments before the crash, as is evident in videos that show its lights going out and coming back on. Homedy said that information gleaned from the vessel's voyage data recorder is relatively basic, so that information in the engine room will help us tremendously. The FBI is now conducting a criminal investigation into the bridge collapse that is focused on the circumstances leading up to it and whether all federal laws were followed, according to a different person familiar with the matter. The person wasn't authorized to discuss details of the investigation publicly and spoke to the AP on condition of anonymity. FBI agents were aboard the cargo ship on Monday conducting court-authorized law enforcement activity, the agency said in a statement. It didn't elaborate and said it wouldn't comment further on the investigation, which was first reported by the Washington Post. Meanwhile, Mayor Brandon Scott issued a statement Monday announcing a partnership with 2 law firms to launch legal action to hold the wrongdoers responsible and mitigate harm to the people of Baltimore. He said the city needs to act quickly to protect its own interests. Scott said the city will take decisive action to hold responsible all entities accountable for the Key Bridge tragedy, including the owner, operator, and manufacturer of the cargo ship Dolly, which began its journey roughly a half hour before losing power and veering off course. The Dolly is managed by Synergy Marine Group and owned by Grace Ocean Private Limited, both of Singapore. Danish shipping giant Maersk chartered the Dolly. Synergy and Grace Ocean filed a court petition soon after the collapse seeking to limit their legal liability, a routine procedure for cases litigated under U.S. maritime law. Their joint filing seeks to cap the company's liability at roughly $43.6 million. That's cute. It estimates that the vessel itself is valued at up to $90 million and was owed over $1.1 million in income from freight. The estimate also deducts 2 major expenses, at least $28 million in repair costs and at least $19.5 million in salvage costs. Due to the magnitude of the incident, there are various government agencies conducting investigations in which we are fully participating, Synergy spokesman Daryl Wilson said in a statement Monday. Out of respect for these investigations and any future legal proceedings, it would be inappropriate to comment further at this time. The companies filed their petition under a provision of an 1851 maritime law that allows them to seek to limit their liability to the value of the vessel's remains after a casualty. Attorneys for some of the victims and a worker who survived the collapse argued Monday that the companies that own and manage the ship are taking advantage of an archaic law and attempting to protect their assets. Imagine telling that to grieving families. While they're planning a funeral, the owner of the boat is in court. Attorney L. Chris Stewart said during a news conference in Baltimore. And you know what? I agree. Let's think of the rich people. Let's make sure that they have everything they need to be supported during this difficult time. The road crew absolutely had zero warning in the moments before the collapse, Stewart said, even though a last-minute mayday call from the ship's pilot allowed nearby police officers to stop traffic from trying to cross the span. 3 of the workers' bodies are still missing as crews continue the dangerous work of removing massive chunks of steel from the river. Julio Cervantes, who survived falling from the bridge, narrowly escaped drowning by rolling down his work vehicle's window and fighting through the frigid water despite being unable to swim, attorneys said. He clung to debris until he was rescued. Holy cow, that is awesome. I didn't know that anyone had survived the crash. This was all preventable, Stewart said. That is why we were brought in to investigate and find out what has happened and give these families a voice. The investigations come amid concerns about the safety of thousands of U.S. bridges and days after more than 24 river barges broke loose and struck a closed span in Pittsburgh. Well, that was a much longer article than I thought it was going to be. And it was informative. So we learned that the FBI is involved, and the way that the article is phrased makes it sound like they're simply doing it out of an abundance of caution. Now, there's no evidence at this point that I'm aware of that this was some sort of terrorist attack. And I think that going around and saying that it's a terrorist attack at this point is irresponsible. But I do think that it's highly suspicious that one of the major bridges in that section of the traffic network is now suddenly in operation. It's going to take at least, I think, a year, 2 years to get a replacement. And in the meantime, all of these different, everyone that used that bridge has to find another way. And that's having a huge impact on Baltimore. It's likely having a huge impact on national security as well. because this was a key bridge. I mean, no pun intended. Overall, interesting stuff. And now for something completely different. Amazon grows to over 750,000 robots as world's second largest private employer replaces over 100,000 humans. Thursday, April 11th, so almost a week ago. Amazon.com Inc. is rapidly advancing its use of robotics, deploying over 750,000 robots to work alongside its employees. The world's second largest private employer employs 1.5 million people. While that's a lot, it's a decrease of over 100,000 employees from the 1.6 million workers it had in 2021. Meanwhile, the company had 520,000 robots in 2022 and 200,000 robots in 2019. While Amazon is bringing on hundreds of thousands of robots per year, the company is slowly decreasing its employee numbers. Of course, it's slowly decreasing the employee numbers. It's not possible for a human at this point to replace a human. Humans are more capable, but we're not going to be the only game in town for long. The robots, including new models like Sequoia and Digit, are designed to perform repetitive tasks, thereby improving efficiency, safety, and delivery speed for Amazon's customers. Sequoia, for example, speeds up inventory management and order processing in fulfillment centers, while Digit, a bipedal robot developed in collaboration with Agility Robotics, handles tasks like moving empty tote boxes. The significant investment in robotics showcases Amazon's commitment to innovation in its supply chain and highlights the company's belief in the synergistic potential of human-robot collaboration. No, that is just corporate speak for investors, shareholders. Don't be alarmed. We're not going to lay everybody off. But that is exactly the end game. They are going to lay everybody off. As soon as they have robots that can take over for a human and do the job, not even as well as a human, I would say to 70 to 80% as well as a human, you can eliminate so many jobs. And if you are a capitalist, you are salivating at that prospect because, unlike humans, robots are pretty much a one-time cost. Yes, they need to be repaired on occasion. On occasion, they need to be replaced. But by and large, when you have a robot, it can work longer than a human, harder than a human. And the thing that's been holding robots back is that they simply cannot think. With the advent of large language models and generative AI, that limitation is disappearing. But let's get back to the story. The significant investment in robotics showcases Amazon's commitment to innovation in its supply chain and highlights the company's belief in the synergistic potential of human-robot collaboration. Despite the massive scale of layoffs, Freudian slip there, despite the massive scale of automation, Amazon emphasizes that deploying robots has led to the creation of new skilled job categories at the company, reflecting a broader industry trend toward the integration of advanced technologies with human workforces. That's because we're simply in the augmentation phase of artificial intelligence and robotics. Right now, that technology is early stage. It's not very good and it can't do much, but the potential is there. And these executives at these companies that, at Amazon specifically, they employ 1.5 million people around the world. If they can find robots that can take the jobs of humans, they're going to save so much money. They're going to make the company so much more profitable. And what they're doing now is they're kind of like trying to get it in the door. They're trying to make sure that as companies start using artificial intelligence, that it's going to, it's occurring to me that I should read through these things, get my thoughts together before this. I'm doing all of this live, but it's all right. So ultimately, the point is that, if you can use robots to replace humans, then your company is going to be more profitable. And that is something that capitalist companies in general are going to be open to. The phase that we're in now is making sure that people don't get scared off by all the automation that's happening. Because if you think, even 5 minutes into the future, you know that the more companies that can use robots, the less they'll need humans for. And when you have more and more and more humans out of work, you wind up with social unrest, you wind up with riots, you wind up with crime. People want to work. People want to live a life that doesn't have a ton of stress and anxiety, and having a good job is key to that. It's central to the American dream. What we're going to see over the next couple of years is a ton of greedy corporations looking to eliminate humans at every turn because they want to do the work of the company cheaper. And according to the doctrine that we have, our legal doctrine about businesses, the highest value a company can have is returning value to shareholders. And I think that's wrong. I think one of the first duties that a company should have is to its workers, because without them, you don't have a company. Of course, if you lay off a ton of people, if it's possible to have an entire business without workers, then perhaps there's a case to be made for the fact that shareholder value is the most important thing. Because if you get rid of the workers, you don't have to be loyal to those workers. Of course, companies aren't loyal to those workers now. Amazon's deployment of over 750,000 robots represents a significant move toward automation at the world's second largest employer. The shift has the potential to significantly impact job dynamics within the company and beyond. While Amazon asserts that robots are meant to work collaboratively with human employees, for now, it should say for now, assisting them with repetitive tasks to improve efficiency and workplace safety, concerns about job displacements and the implication for the workforce are inevitable. Well, no shit, Sherlock. Of course it's inevitable. Amazon's integration of robots like Sequoia and Digit into its fulfillment centers is part of its broader strategy to enhance its supply chain operations through advanced technologies. The robots are designed to streamline operations and ensure faster delivery times to customers. The company emphasizes that robotic solutions support workplace safety and allow it to offer a wider range of products for same-day or next-day delivery. It's fine. It's fine that people are being laid off. It's fine that people are going to be losing their jobs because it makes things easier for consumers. And that's really what we all care about. That and the profits for the shareholders. The introduction of such a large number of robots into the workforce raises questions about the future role of human labor in Amazon's operational model. The impact on jobs, particularly tasks that are highly repetitive and could be easily automated, is a concern for many. Researchers from institutions like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology has shown that industrial robots have a significant negative impact on workers, affecting jobs and wages in the areas where they are deployed. Again, this seems pretty obvious. The broader discussion on the economic and political consequences of automation highlights widespread fears of job displacement and the potential for increased income inequality. Despite these concerns, Amazon has pointed out the creation of 700 categories of skilled job types that previously did not exist at the company, suggesting that automation can also lead to the creation of new types of employment opportunities. This evolution within Amazon's workforce could reflect a shift in the nature of work where human employees move towards more complex, non-repetitive tasks that require higher levels of skill and creativity. And that's fine for now, but that is not where this technology is going. Where this technology is going is that it's going to replace humans. And it certainly seems to me like the people in government are not paying any attention to this at all. But this is a ticking time bomb. This is how you get a depression. If tons and tons of companies lay off their workers because those workers can be replaced with artificial intelligence and robotics, then you have millions of people out of work. And the last time that happened, we had a depression. History is going to repeat itself as far as, having a depression, unless you take action, unless you learn from the lessons of history. And too often it seems that we really don't. Amazon could serve as a microcosm for broader trends in the economy, where the integration of robotics and artificial intelligence reshapes industries and the labor market. The challenge for Amazon and society at large will be to navigate these changes, in a way that maximizes the benefits of automation while mitigating while mitigating negative impacts on employment and ensuring that the gains from increased productivity are shared broadly across the workforce. I don't like where things are headed. I mean, I'm super thrilled, technically speaking, about what artificial intelligence can do. It enables people to be more productive. Absolutely, 100%. But this stuff needs to be done carefully. One of the final paragraphs in here, it talked about how workers could reskill. So let me get that. All right. Despite these concerns, Amazon had pointed out the creation of 700 categories of skilled job sites that previously didn't exist at the company, suggesting that automation can also lead to the creation of new types of employment opportunities. Well, that is true. Anytime you have a groundbreaking new technology that changes the way that something important happens, you wind up having new jobs, new markets, new industries being created. But on the scale of what we're talking about, with ultimately millions of people being out of work because of artificial intelligence and robotics, that's a lot of reskilling. Like, the only way I see to avoid a depression is going to be something like a government program where, you are trained for a new job, or honestly, universal basic income would be the best approach. But I think politically that would be too tough right now. We should start talking about it. UBI makes a lot of sense. I should probably talk about that more at length another time. It's something it's an idea that I've liked for years. I think it would solve a lot of problems we have in our society. And every time universal basic income has been tested and studied, it's been found to have massive positive effects on the local economy, because when people get money for free, which is what universal basic income is, they put it towards housing, they put it towards businesses, they put it towards making more money, because people want to be successful. They want to have more than they have. They want to be in a better place. And if they have the tools, they'll do so. All right. So, next up, everybody's favorite topic, COVID-19. Let's see. All right, you guys can see the entire thing. So, why am I talking about COVID? Why am I even bringing this up? The perception among most people is the pandemic is over, it's done, it's not coming back, and there's nothing to worry about anymore. It's just get your vaccine, get your booster shot, and go back and live your normal life. But what hasn't been emphasized with the rollout of these vaccines is that if you're exposed to COVID enough, you're going to have a breakthrough infection, which is when you're vaccinated, you have immune protection, and you contract COVID anyway. This can happen because the virus has been everywhere. Contrary to popular belief, COVID hangs in the air like smoke. It's airborne. And someone with COVID can walk into a room, they can exhale the virus all over the place, it can hang in the air like smoke, and then they can leave. You can come in 5 minutes later, and if the ventilation is not good ventilation, you could be breathing in air with infectious virus in it. The perception that most people have is that the virus is transmitted by droplets, which is where the advice to stay 6 feet apart, constantly wash your hands came from. When the evidence came out that COVID is airborne, that information wasn't disseminated to the public as broadly. I don't know for sure the reason for that, but I would guess the answer has something to do with capitalism. So Let's read this. Okay, so this is part 2 of this exclusive video interview. MedPage Today editor-in-chief talks with Monica Bertagnolli, MD, the 17th director of the National Institutes of Health, about the day-to-day work at the NIH on pandemic preparedness, the importance of looking for new approaches to testing, and the status of long COVID research. So I'm not sure, well, I'm very sure about the status of copyright law. If MedPage Today wanted to sue me for playing this video, they could, but I believe I'm safe if I read it. So I'm going to read this article. Okay, so Faust is the editor-in-chief. He's the one conducting the interview. And Bertagnolli is the director of the NIH. So let's figure out what the NIH is. What is the NIH? Okay, according to the NIH website, the National Institutes of Health, part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, is the nation's medical research agency, making important discoveries that improve health and save lives. And we can see that Monica Bertagnolli, I really should figure out how to pronounce her name, is the director. She's been the director since late last year. All right. Hello, this is Jeremy Faust, editor-in-chief of MedPage Today. I'm sure you're already a subscriber if you're watching. I know I am. We're joined today by Dr. Monica Bertagnolli. All right, I'd like to talk a little bit about the NIH and pandemic preparedness. I'm sure you're all on the edge of your seat about this. Obviously, there was some involvement, obviously during the pandemic, of the COVID-19 pandemic, including the NIH was hosting guidelines for COVID clinical policies and that sort of thing. What's the day-to-day work at the NIH on pandemic preparedness like? So before we get into the director's answer, I want to highlight one thing in this paragraph. So look at the phrasing here. Obviously, there was some involvement, obviously during the pandemic, of the COVID-19 pandemic. His phrasing puts the pandemic firmly in the past. The pandemic is not in the past. More than 1,000 people a week across the United States have died directly as a result of contracting COVID-19. For months, it's been more than 1,000 people a week. And the emergency phase of the pandemic is over. That's true. But the pandemic itself is still here. The virus is still here. It's still killing people. And it's still being spread. People talk about COVID like it's no big deal, like it's just the flu, and you get it, you shake it off, you move on. But we know from research that between 10 and 20% of all people that contract COVID get long COVID, and long COVID is mainly understood to be, it's a post-viral syndrome, which is something that sometimes happens with a virus. Your body doesn't respond to the virus as well as it should, and you wind up with symptoms as a result. And until now, there has been a lot of uncertainty about what long COVID is. In this article, we get some new information about what long COVID is. But the framing is pandemic preparedness. And I just wanted to point out that this type of framing is very subtle. And they say, when someone talks about the pandemic in the past tense, it implicitly says it's over. And so if you disagree, you're wrong. And that framing is pervasive, it's everywhere, and it's factually incorrect. All right, so Dr. Bertagnolli, I really should figure out how to pronounce her name. Let's play this video for a minute. Oh, it's not wanting to play. I tried. We'll call her Dr. Monica. I know I can pronounce that. So pandemic preparedness is an activity that takes place across all of health and human services and even involves other aspects of the government. I think one of the things that people might not realize is that the NIH director sits as part of an overall leadership team across health and human services. So for example, we work very closely with the CDC and other team members across all of health and human services on pandemic preparedness. And that's an activity that takes place all the time now during COVID. You see how she frames it as being something in the present. I really like that. But also with any kind of threat that comes up, particularly from infectious agents. What do you think we learned from this past pandemic? There he is with the past framing again, that we could apply to the future. Dr. Monica. Oh, many things. We learned about very rapid generation and deployment of testing materials through programs that were an amazing collaboration between NIH researchers and others across health and human services. We learned about community levels responses in 2020 through 2024, which are very different. Our world, our healthcare delivery system, our country is different than it ever has been before. So we learned about how to deliver care as well as vaccines across a really broad and diverse nation. One moment, my mouth is getting dry. We also learned about some of the challenges of performing this kind of research, staying on top of variants that come and go, developing both vaccines as well as treatment modalities for the specific agent. And then finally, we learned a lot about conducting research. We learned we could do much more remotely, both to care for people and also to conduct really critical research. Faust. Do you think that we did as well as some of our peer nations in terms of the research? Look, the UK, I think, outclassed us in terms of just marshaling what they had to do to perform adaptive trials of multiple things to figure out what didn't work, what did work. We did some of that in the government, but if there were a new pandemic tomorrow, would we be ahead in terms of, all right, we're going to randomize 100,000 people to 50 different compounds and adapt these trials to figure out what works so that we can save lives sooner rather than later? Dr. Monica. I think we did a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic. We continue to study COVID-19 as well as other emerging threats, and I think we'd do very well if we hit a challenge again. NIAID, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which I did not know existed until today, has a program that is going continuously to innovate in methods for vaccine generation, for identification and diagnosis of emerging threats, for observation from the community and clinical environment, and for being able to both monitor and respond very quickly. I think it's actually pretty exciting to see things that are going on behind the scenes here at NIH for all the new threats. And so I think we're going to be as ready as any government or organization could possibly be. Here's where it gets interesting. And does that mean you're developing new approaches to testing? Because you did mention testing before as an area where we could, maybe, we've done better over time, but could still do better next time. Dr. Monica. Oh, absolutely. In fact, there's an entire network, the Point of Care Testing Network that's run out of NBIB. There are so many acronyms. National Institutes of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, that is constantly looking for ways not only for infectious threats, but for other health issues. Because diagnosis, understanding the actual condition that is affecting people, is almost as critical as treatment. I would say it's as critical, because if you don't understand what you're treating, you're probably going to treat the wrong thing. And is certainly absolutely an essential prelude to any kind of successful treatment. So very, very active area of investigation across NIH. Faust. In addition to the importance of researching SARS-CoV-2, other viruses, a lot of discussion about gain-of-function research. I know you've been on the record on this before. Can we actually learn anything about viruses without doing experiments, such as gain-of-function and loss-of-function as well? Because it's a spectrum, and depending on how you look at a virus, loss and gain are different things. Okay, so in case you're not familiar, gain-of-function research is essentially where we fiddle around with the genome of a virus and we try to make it do new things. This obviously could go very wrong if it's not handled well, and gain-of-function research is very controversial. When it comes to loss of function, which I haven't heard of before, but I assume, it's similar. You see what you can take away from a virus. So the thing is, it looks like viruses, DNA, things like this, essentially they're instructions. They're biological instructions that are processed by machines that generate proteins. That's essentially the building blocks of DNA. DNA are instructions for how to build cells and how to build them in a particular way so that an organism can come into being and then live and reproduce. So gain of function and loss of function they're both used because DNA doesn't come with an instruction manual. We don't know how the expression of a particular gene if a gene is transcribed and a protein is created, we don't know what it does unless we change something about the organism. So, in gain of function and loss of function research, what they're doing is they're adjusting the genome of the virus and then seeing the effect that it has. And by doing this, they can start to build a picture of what these genes actually do. And as we gain this understanding, we can design better gene therapies. We can do so much if we understand exactly how DNA works. We understand what it does to a degree, but we don't understand the ins and outs of every single protein that can be created. So, at a high level, with probably some inaccuracies here and there, that's gain of function and loss of function. Moving on. Dr. Monica, well, of course, we can learn a tremendous amount about viruses from any number of different methods of studying them. I do know that gain of function, looking at the hypermutable region of the genome of a virus that might code a particular area of importance for susceptibility, might be a good bet to kind of try to be able to get ahead of something before it truly emerges. But that kind of research certainly comes with risks. One of the theories around COVID-19 is that it was the result of gain of function research and accidentally escaped into the wild. But we do not know if that is the case. We do know that there's a lot of evidence that points to a potential lab leak as the source, but we still don't know definitively how COVID was introduced to the world. But that kind of research certainly comes with risk, and we really have worked hard to come up with very, very stringent oversight and containment procedures to make that kind of research, if it is to occur, as absolutely safe as possible. You know, the bottom line is the benefit of any research like that has got to exceed the risk. Very true. And so that's why any kind of gain of function research for infectious agents is taken very, very seriously. And in terms of long COVID, everyone always asks about this. There's a lot of funding. Where do you see this heading in the next few years? Dr. Monica, it's a terrible, terrible condition. Chronic post-infectious syndromes have been around as long as there have been viruses in humans. And it is a really, really terrible affliction when someone develops one of these conditions. COVID has introduced a whole new level of this in our society. The fundamental biology that's been conducted by the long COVID research team is really fascinating, but also sobering. The agent can live for a long time in tissues. This is new information. This is saying that COVID-19 can live in your body, can live in your cells chronically. It can surround nerve cells, probably likely one of the ways that it produces some of its terrible symptoms, such as dysautonomia. And we have no effective way of eradicating it, not yet. Which is why the most important thing you can do to protect yourself against long COVID is not to get COVID in the first place. There's a 10 to 20% chance that every infection of COVID-19 can give you long COVID. And so after 6 infections, you're pretty much guaranteed to have long COVID. By this point in the pandemic, many people have had it 3, 4, 5 times. The more times you have it, the more likely you are to get long COVID, for which there is no cure. One thing that's important, though, that's come out of several meta-analyses is there is a way to prevent it. And the single way to prevent it is vaccination. Well, that's not right. I mean, yes, vaccination can prevent some infection. It can prevent most infection. These vaccines are very, very effective. They just don't last forever. With the mRNA vaccines, your protection starts to wear off after 3 months. After 6 months, with Novavax, your protection starts to wear off. Vaccines are important, but when it comes to protecting yourself against COVID, you need a layered strategy. You need to mask when you're around other people. Faust, I just want to follow up on something you said a moment ago about where the virus can be found in tissues. Are you suggesting that long COVID is actually, the mechanism of that is persistent live virus in humans? Dr. Monica, we see as evidence of persistent live virus in humans in various tissue reservoirs, including surrounding nerves, the brain, the gastrointestinal tract, to the lung. Faust, okay, so you're saying this goes beyond the PCR's ability to get it in a regular swab so that we are missing chronic cases of SARS-CoV-2. Dr. Monica, correct. The virus can persist in tissues for months, perhaps even years. All right, so let's talk biology a little bit. What happens when you contract a virus is the virus hijacks your immune system. No, the virus hijacks the cells in your body and it starts replicating copies of itself. And eventually, your immune system notices that something is wrong. It dispatches white blood cells to attack these zombified cells, and eventually the virus gets eradicated. In healthy people, this usually takes 7 to 10 days. And what this is saying is that when you get long COVID, they're discovering that the reason people have persistent symptoms after a COVID infection is because the virus is in their body and it hasn't been removed. It says there are reservoirs. A reservoir is where the virus gets a foothold in your not your immune system. The virus gets a foothold in your body and it continues to pump out copies of itself. With SARS-CoV-2 specifically, what it does is it dysregulates your immune system a little bit. We don't know to what degree, we don't know for how long, but we do know that after a COVID infection, your immune system gets dysregulated for a little while. What this sounds like it's saying to me, and I am not a medical expert, I am not a doctor, I don't play one on TV, but what this sounds like it's saying is that long COVID is where your body has not cleared out the COVID virus, which means that long COVID would more accurately be called chronic COVID, which is what do they clarify here? So the host says, you're saying this goes beyond the PCR's ability to get it in a regular swab. So a PCR test is the gold standard for testing for COVID infection. What happens is they do the swab into your nose and then they get it tested. I don't know exactly how the PCR test works. I know that there's a rapid antigen test, which is what you get over the counter and what most places are doing. PCR takes a lab and it takes up to 24 hours to get the results back. It's supposed to be extremely sensitive. And the standard has been, if you don't have a positive COVID test with a PCR test, you don't have COVID. But what this is saying is that when the PCR test is done, it's swabbing the nose. But these viral reservoirs of COVID are happening elsewhere in the body. They're happening in nerve cells, in brain cells, in the lungs. It doesn't say that it's happening in the sinuses, which is where we test for COVID. So when COVID infects you, it can get into your system. And if your body doesn't clear it completely out, it gets a foothold, it keeps pumping out virus, and you wind up having continuing symptoms because you continue to have replicating live COVID in your system. You test negative on a PCR test, you test negative on a rapid test, but you still have COVID in your body. This is terrifying. COVID is a vascular disease. It presents in the lungs, but everywhere that your blood goes, COVID goes. And that's why these reservoirs can be all over the body, because it goes everywhere the blood goes. Okay, as far as I'm aware, this is the first time this has been, said publicly. So this is huge. Faust, the host, he says, okay, I think that's certainly one theory. Okay, she says, correct, the virus can persist in tissues for months, perhaps even years. He says, okay, I think that's certainly one theory, but I'm not sure that that's settled. Is that fair? I mean, there's one thing between people who are autopsied, they died of viral sepsis, as opposed to people walking around. Is there a distinction there? This is super interesting. This woman is the director of the National Institutes of Health, and he says to her, "Are you sure you got it right?" I'm pretty sure that he wouldn't say this to a male doctor, but that's neither here nor there. So he pushes back. He's like, "That can't be real." And she says, "Our emerging data shows that the virus can persist into tissues in the long term." And I think that's really critical because it does help us think about possible ways to combat it. One being better antivirals. I think there's a lot of focus on developing new antivirals as a possible way of preventing long COVID, and the other might be more aggressive treatment with antiviral therapy upon initial diagnosis. Antiviral therapy such as Paxlovid. Faust. If that's the case, then it could be reactivated just like herpes is and shingles. Are we going to start seeing people get COVID not from infection but from themselves in reactivation? You know, if I was this guy and I was interviewing her, and Dr. Monica, if you'd like to come on the Ben Smith show, I would love to have you. If I was him, I wouldn't respond to the stunning revelation that long COVID appears to be caused by live reservoirs of virus in your system by saying, "Are you sure that that's not just in corpses?" Certainly a choice. Okay, so he goes, "All right, we're watching the story very carefully. Let's end with a little bit more about your role at the NIH. Let's just sweep this entire huge revelation under the rug." Okay, so I just did a lot of talking about this. There's a good TikTok video that talks about this article that we just read, summarizes it a lot quicker and a lot better. So we are going to pull that up real quick. Un momento, because I need to do some things. All right, turn that off. Switch to the appropriate.
So, in case you missed it, the director of
Oh,
the
oh,
National
oh.
Institute.
Wasn't ready for that to start. All right, so I am going to turn my camera and microphone off while we watch this.
National Institute of Health just did an interview in which she reiterated what we have known for a while from studies, which is that COVID can stay in your body and replicate. Long COVID. COVID can stay. It's not just that acute infection done. Like, it can stay and replicate all within your body. She says, referring to COVID, the agent can live for a long time in tissues. It can surround nerve cells, probably likely one of the ways that it produces some of its terrible symptoms, such as dysautonomia. Sidebar with dysautonomia, the Washington Post recently did an article where they told about how recent studies suggest that 2 to 14 people who get COVID might go on to develop POTS. Your girl's working on figuring out she's got POTS now. Anyway, back to the interview with the NIH director. The interviewer's like, hold on a second. What are you saying? Are you sure that it's like actually persistent live virus? What do you mean? And she's like, yeah, we see evidence of persistent live virus in humans in various tissue reservoirs, including surrounding nerves, the brain, the GI tract, to the lung. Mind you, back in 2022, the World Health Organization executive director was talking about this. Study after study after study comes out about how COVID can just hide out in parts of your body, in your vascular systems. It's not just respiratory. It never has been just respiratory. Think of COVID as having a key to every single part of your body. It's just got that one key for everything. With what we're dealing with here, no infection is mild, and each subsequent infection can fuck you up so much more. If you're not wearing a mask when you're sharing air with other people, consider this your sign.
All right, I'm working on getting everything up. All right, I have returned. Let's turn TikTok off. And I'm going to go back to reading the news. Whoever's watching this, I just want you to know it bothers me as much as it bothers you to have this dead space. There we go. All right, what is the next article I wanted to read? Whoops. I keep losing windows. All right. This is Consequences of Aging, Why We Die, explained by Nobel biologist. Nobel Prize winning molecular biologist Venki Ramakrishnan. Of course, I get Ramakrishnan fine, but I can't say molecular. Sat down with the ABC News Live. Sounds like that needs an exclamation point at the end of that. ABC News Live to discuss the science and ethics of extending the human lifespan. In his new book, Why We Die, The New Science of Aging and the Quest for Immortality, Ramakrishnan explains why we may not want to lengthen our lives much longer. Well, climate change would be one heck of a reason. Ramakrishnan's thought-provoking argument is that a society where people lived for hundreds of years could potentially become stagnant, as it would consist of the same group of people living longer, raising important questions about societal dynamics and progress. I think I have a very simple solution to that. We ship people off to other worlds. If we figure out immortality, we figure out how to get people to travel through the galaxy safely, let's just send them off planet. And then that way they can take their immortality and boldly go. And that way things don't get so terrible here. All right, ABC News. If you think it might be wonderful to live forever, you may want to hear what a Nobel Prize winning molecular biologist has to say that could change your mind. I really hate that news tone. We're gonna move on. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. So humans now live twice as long as we did 150 years ago, but you raised some caveats to why we may not want to lengthen our lives that much longer. Why is that? Well, I think a society where everybody lived indefinitely or a very long time, say hundreds of years, would be a very different society. It would be quite stagnant. It would be the same group just living longer and longer. You wouldn't have that turnover between generations. You know, maybe new ideas, things like that. But I think that's still in the realm of science fiction. For now. AI is coming. AI is going to be much more useful than we think it is right now. It's going to speed up scientific research so much. So we're having more and more older people well past retirement. And we want to see how we can keep older people healthy and productive, and energetic and actually lively. So I think a lot of biology is trying to understand those causes so we don't suffer some of the debilitating consequences of aging. ABC News Live. Explain why it is that sometimes our biological age doesn't match our chronological age. That's because aging you can think of as an accumulation of damage as over time, and we have very sophisticated repair mechanisms, and we have ways to deal with the problems of old age, of the accumulation of damage, accumulation of garbage in the cells. We have recycling mechanisms, and all those things break down, and the rate at which they break down is different for different people. And then ABC News Live says, explain the new research, though, that talks about how there are certain blood markers that indicate why people age faster than others. And we could say this is to separate from drinking and smoking or lack of sleep. Yeah, so blood. There are different markers for aging. So some markers are on our DNA. Our DNA acquires marks called epigenetic marks as we age. And that changes the pattern with which we express different genes. So it changes how our biology works. There are also markers in our blood. And this was found because when they connected an old animal with a young animal and allowed them to exchange their blood supply, that's a really weird way of describing that. The old animal benefited from the young blood, and that suggested these things in younger blood that deteriorate or don't exist or have changed in older blood. And people are trying to find what those markers are. ABC News Live. Let's say in the next few decades we're able to come up with a cure for cancer, high blood pressure, diabetes. What's the best case scenario, do you think, for the longevity of human life? So someone did a calculation, and if we estimated some of the major causes of fatality today, like the things you mentioned, you would only gain about 15 years. But what biologists think is that if you tackle the underlying causes of aging, then you could really expect to live a longer and healthier life. I mean, that's true to a degree. If you live long enough, you're going to get cancer. That's just what happens. Eventually, a cancer cell will come into being, your immune system will miss it, a tumor will grow, it will spread, and then you'll die. I mean, it's what eventually happens unless something else gets you. But I think that if AI can help us figure out aging, it can also help us figure out uh, cancer. I really should have this stuff written down. All right. Next up, Quentin Tarantino, everyone's favorite pretentious indie filmmaker, drops The Movie Critic as his final film. Now, Quentin Tarantino was one of the premier indie filmmakers in the late 90s, and he has had quite the career since his first film, which I believe was Reservoir Dogs. He's known for violence, he's known for super stylized fight scenes, but he's been really keen on the idea of ending his filmography after 10 movies. And people have been talking about this film called The Movie Critic that he's been working on building and saying that that's going to be his final film. And apparently, that has changed. Deadline reports. Quentin Tarantino's movies are always full of surprises, and here is one about The Movie Critic we did not expect. Deadline can reveal that Tarantino has dropped the film as his 10th and final project. He simply changed his mind, Deadline has been told. Tarantino is going to have Brad Pitt as the principal star, which would have marked their third teaming after Inglourious Basterds and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There were rumors that many from the cast of his past films might take part, and Sony was preparing to make the film after doing such a superb job on the last one. Word is that Tarantino had rewritten his script, which delayed the start of production, but this is his 10th and final film, and Tarantino simply decided The Movie Critic will not be it. This is the biggest surprise to Tarantino fans since years back when Deadline revealed he had shelved The Hateful Eight after he gave a small group of actors his script and one of them shared it with their rep. Soon it had been copied and the rough draft was shared all over town and online. Tarantino felt betrayed, but he eventually returned to the project after staging a reading for charity and drawing raves for it. As for The Movie Critic, originally planned to be his 10th and final film, Tarantino had simply had a change of heart, and Deadline hears he will not be moving forward with the project. Sources close to the director said he changed his mind and is going back to the drawing board to figure out what the final movie will be. The Movie Critic project gained a lot of momentum after the SAG-AFTRA strike ended when Deadline broke that Pitt would be joining the film with the hope to start shooting in 2024. Tarantino opened up a bit to Deadline's Baz Bamigboy. I have no idea how to pronounce that last name. At Cannes in May, when the filmmaker presided over a screening of Rolling Thunder. He said at the time his movie was set in California in the year of the film's release, which is 1977, and that it is based on a guy who really lived but was never famous, and he used to write movie reviews for a porno rag. The inspiration goes back to a job Tarantino had as a teen. That is a tongue twister. Loading porn magazines into a vending machine and emptying quarters out of the cash dispenser. All the other stuff was too skanky to read, but then there was this porno rag that had a really interesting movie page, he told the reporter. There is one critic in particular Tarantino liked who wrote snarky and smart as the second string critic. Like with shelving The Hateful Eight, Tarantino has pivoted when he finds it necessary, a trait that has served him well in his career, and is sure to help on whatever he does decide to do as his final film. We will update the story when there is more to reveal. I think the only thing that I really have to say about that is that I don't really care. I don't understand why Tarantino thinks that he has to stick to 10 films and only 10 films. Like, the man has more money than God. If he wanted to make films until he dies, he could. Like, he's only in his 60s, I think. Now, I mean, if he's decided, I don't want to do this and I know I don't want to do this, that's his choice. That's his right. And he has every right to do what he wants to do with his career and with his life, and he can spend his time how he wants to spend his time. But I don't want to hear about how much he wants this to be his final film. I don't care about that. I just want him to release his movies. And if this is the last movie he's going to ever do, fine. But I'm not going to get all bent out of shape because he's not doing one where Brad Pitt writes reviews of pornos in the 70s. I'm sure it would have been fun to watch. Tarantino films are always fun to watch. But I have fallen out of love with him a bit since the early 2000s. All right. Do I want to go over anything else? I think we should head over to TikTok for a little bit. So for this first one, I am going to take a short break.
I don't think we talk enough about how responsible the internet is for making work culture, especially corporate culture, a literal hellscape for millennials and Gen Zers. Like before the internet, the way that companies would seek out employees is they'd put a classified ad in the newspaper, right? Where space was at a premium, quite limited, so they couldn't put a fulsome job description. So they would just include a job title, and if you were searching for a job and you felt like you were reasonably qualified for the position, you'd circle it, and then you'd physically bring in your resume to the company, and then they would call you back and they'd sit you down for an interview. And the interviews, because they had such a limited pool of candidates that were probably hyper regionally focused, they just took what they could get, and there was an understanding that the company would have to train and work on the employee to get them to fit, and so what mattered was core competencies like communication skills, people skills, that sort of thing. And that's also why companies used to promote much more internally. It had nothing to do with the fact that they were nicer. It's just it was a lot harder for them to find externally qualified candidates who knew the culture enough, hence why.
Well, that's embarrassing. I didn't realize that the video hadn't moved over. So let me fix that real quick. Third time's the charm.
I don't think we talk enough about how responsible the internet is for making work culture, especially corporate culture, a literal hellscape for millennials and Gen Zers. Like before the internet, the way that companies would seek out employees is they'd put a classified ad in the newspaper, right? Where space was at a premium, quite limited, so they couldn't put a fulsome job description. So they would just include a job title, and if you were searching for a job and you felt like you were reasonably qualified for the position, you'd circle it, and then you'd physically bring in your resume to the company, and then they would call you back and they'd sit you down for an interview. And the interviews, because they had such a limited pool of candidates that were probably hyper regionally focused, they just took what they could get, and there was an understanding that the company would have to train and work on the employee to get them to fit, and so what mattered was core competencies like communication skills, people skills, that sort of thing. And that's also why companies used to promote much more internally. It had nothing to do with the fact that they were nicer. It's just it was a lot harder for them to find externally qualified candidates who knew the culture enough. Hence why you see in 80s movies, one of the main tropes is about the dad or parent or whatever trying to get a promotion at work, because this was a regular thing because companies used to be forced to promote from within. Then with the rise of the internet, suddenly the candidate pool was literally global. And also companies had a lot more space to be fulsome about the specific qualifications they were looking for in a job. So as opposed to like a job title and a few lines in a newspaper classified section, suddenly you could get a whole page's worth of expected qualifications down to the very granular skill. And then along with that, recruiter culture started up to find these magical unicorn candidates based on these very specific, lengthy qualifications for a position. And companies felt, well, we might be being picky, but now we have a global pool of candidates, so we can just find that superstar. And hey, that also means we no longer have to invest in our staff. We should expect them to hit the ground running. We're going to put minimal effort into upskilling or training these candidates to fit the roles. We're just going to hope we get a magic candidate out of a potential pool of millions of employees, and they'll just be great immediately, and we don't have to worry about this. It also made it a lot easier for companies to create bullshit jobs, because suddenly, the cost of putting out classified ads was zero. You could put out ads as lengthy and detailed as you want, and your candidate pool was worldwide. So you could create as many complex jobs. You could invent jobs that you think your company needed for this or that particular role. And you would, instead of having one interview, you could have like limitless interviews to narrow down this enormous pool and hope you get the superstar candidate, and also tacitly understanding that you could axe this candidate in the next 2 years. If the company bottom line wasn't looking great and you needed to please the stockholders, and then you could just rehire because, again, you have this limitless pool of candidates to pick from. Anyway, I just don't think we think about this enough when we talk about how disposable workers are today. And it's not because companies were any more benign 40 years ago. It's that they literally didn't have the tools that companies have today to reach out to a potential, worldwide pool of billions to hire for specific positions, and how that has made the hiring process, the work culture, everything about working 10 times worse. I don't think we talk enough.
I think that guy is spot on. It used to be very different getting a job. When I first entered the workforce, it was the late 90s. And at that point, if you wanted a job, you still went to the newspaper. The internet was around, but it didn't go mainstream until 1996. So things were still very much done the old way. And he's absolutely right. The company would put an ad in the paper, and they'd just kind of hope that someone nearby would see it. And then the internet came along, and it just changed the entire dynamics of the entire process. It became more acceptable to start getting people from outside your local area. It became easier. I mean, it was always acceptable. It was just harder to do it for roles that were lower in responsibility. Like headhunters have existed for a long time, and these would be recruiters that find executives in different cities and say, hey, would you like to come to this other city and work at this other company and have this fancy title? And that's how it worked. But it's different now. And that's what happens with new technology. It comes along, it has all these second and third order effects that you don't even think of. And artificial intelligence and robotics are the same way. Artificial intelligence specifically, it's going to change so much about our world, and it's going to make the world we live in now as unrecognizable to us as the world 20 years ago and the job market was then. It's
Talk enough about how responsible the internet is.
Okay. Next video.
My conspiracy theory, the hill that I will die on, is if you are both good at your job and a pleasure to work with, like you have a good personality, you can generally get along with people, you will never be promoted. You will never be promoted out of a like hard-working, more junior position where a lot of the hard work exists. Let me explain. If you are in an executive suite, you do not have to be a pleasure to work with or good at your job, right? You don't have to be either of those. If you are at a VP or like director level, you can either be really good at your job or a pleasure to work with. You don't have to be both. And sometimes people are still neither, right? But if you're down here where all of the actual work is being done, it's not being directed, it's not being strategized, you're doing the literal work, they will never allow an employee that is both good at doing the work and good at keeping a smile on their face while doing the work move up that ladder, because they know they can keep serving you shit on a platter and you'll eat it with a smile. I don't know how to get out of that cycle, but I believe in it. It's a curse.
I don't think I agree with her completely. I do know what she's talking about. It does seem like there are people who are good at their jobs and people who are a pleasure to work with, but it feels like you can't do both. I see it a little bit differently. I think that ultimately business is about relationships, and the people that get promoted at a company have better relationships than the people who don't. Obviously, being good at your job is part of it, but I mean, it's not always. We've all seen incompetent people in positions of authority. I think ultimately it is about relationships, but I don't think there's a one size fits all answer for why certain people get ahead in their careers and other people don't. I think it's nuanced, depends on the situation, depends on the company, depends on the social dynamics. But by and large, humans are social animals, and I think that is one of the largest factors. Now, this one is a pretty long video. It's like 9 minutes long. I don't know if we'll watch the whole thing, but it's about the Adderall shortage.
Hey, remember how the DEA was like, the Adderall shortage has nothing to do with us. It's all on the manufacturers. Our quotas are high enough. Well, it turns out that whole time they knew that they'd forced a manufacturer who usually produced 600 million doses, which is 12% of the national average of ADHD meds per year. They had them shut down. Let's discuss. I never usually write scripts for my videos, but this is important and it's going to be a long one. I spent a lot of hours writing a Twitter thread, so I'm just going to kind of use that as a guideline. If my eyes are all over the place, that's part of what it is. What I want to say first and foremost is I am as skeptical of big pharmaceutical companies as anyone else, but I don't trust the DEA either. And like, obviously I can't personally confirm or disprove anything in this article, like personally. But if it is true, and there are parts of it that are for sure true, the revelations are huge. So this video is mainly going to cover a new article from New York Magazine called The Empty Adderall Factory, because it seems like that's finally going to give us some like much needed clarity to at least one cause of the Adderall shortage. But before we get into that, I wanted to go over some info from an October 2023 Time Magazine article just for context and to point out some things that will become a recurring theme across both articles. So I've kept up with the shortage since it began in 2022, and the gist of basically every article about it is no one knows why this is happening. Like the Time article I was talking about begins, like the first line of it is, the US is facing a mystery of missing Adderall, one for which nobody has an answer. So the article then goes on to explain that the FDA's, I've got hair in my mouth, the FDA's lax reporting standards are the, quote, primary reason why there are still only theories about the shortage's cause, which are, quote, impossible to investigate because the agencies aren't required to provide much info to the public and one another. So a lot of people, myself included, blamed the DEA for not allowing their quotas to keep up with rising demand. Like, we knew that there were more diagnoses and like stimulant prescriptions when COVID began, like they went up. So everyone was like, well, the DEA quotas just aren't keeping up with demand. That was the easy answer. Then the DEA came back with a statement and they were like, this has nothing to do with us, and just shifted all the blame to the manufacturers. They said the manufacturers had only sold 70% of the prescription stimulants they were permitted to in 2022, with, quote, 2023 rates on track to match. So the implication was that the shortage had nothing to do with DEA quotas, but was instead, quote, a result of how private companies were handling the drugs further down the line. So like TLDR, it's not our fault at all. It's all on the manufacturers. But as we're going to get into shortly, the DEA quotas might not have been the cause of the shortage, but the DEA itself isn't exactly blameless either. I mean, are they ever? But the Time article also includes some information from a healthcare economist that I find really alarming. The quote is, though no one is ready to make any real allegations, some of Wozniak's colleagues have, I don't know how to say that, have theorized that the missing medication could be sitting quietly in the hands of wholesalers, distributors, and pharmacies who fear future blame if the widespread prevalence of stimulants is someday condemned as a public health issue. Remember this for later. It comes back up. Moving on to the New York Magazine article that inspired this video, the Adderall Factory. A drug maker's feud with the DEA is exacerbating the ADHD meds crisis at a rate of 600 million missing doses per year, written by James D. Walsh. So the company this article focuses on, Ascent, produced 12% of the country's generic stimulants in 2022. They claim they haven't been able to get their allotted materials from the DEA to make these meds since like spring 2022. And, quote, if Ascent's claims are true, that's 600 million missing doses per year from the market. I fucked up that quote. We're going to go with it. I just swapped like 2 words. So they're like, oh, we wish we could help with the shortage. Well, why not? In the spring of 2022, Ascent applied for their annual allotment of raw chemical components that are used to make narcotics, both for ADHD medicine and for painkillers, all of that, which are doled out by the DEA. And instead of receiving an approval like they thought, the DEA instead was like, hi, you're being audited. So the auditors found Ascent was keeping 2 separate sets of DEA forms, which is admittedly pretty suspicious, and take this with a grain of salt because it's just according to Ascent themselves. Ascent claims, quote, every single time the DEA identified a variation, we showed that there was actually 0 missing. They do admit to some minor infractions. The example given is orders struck from 222s, which I assume is a form, must be crossed out with a line and the word cancel written next to them. Investigators found 2 instances in which Ascent employees had drawn the line but failed to write the word. So Ascent claims that's basically all they did, and they still got shut down. Fast forward a year and a half or so to September 2023, Ascent got tired of waiting and decided to file a lawsuit to compel the DEA to formally respond to their quota requests. And the next day, the DEA served them back with a notice that they intended to revoke Ascent's registrations as a manufacturer and lab. The company's lawyer said, quote, this was a paper discrepancy. No one shuts down a company for that. And yet. So a month or so later, on October 31st, 2023, the DEA revealed that their probe into Ascent had actually been related to Operation Bottleneck, which is their panicked attempt to redeem the agency's public image after the opioid epidemic had torn it to shreds. I'm going to pause here to show 2 separate screenshots since I'm not directly quoting either of them. 1, 2, 3. Anyway, in the statement, the DEA said Ascent was guilty of way more egregious errors than the aforementioned paper discrepancies. They alleged that Ascent, quote, did not accurately account for millions of doses of narcotics. A little different. But as a result, Ascent was no longer allowed to make any narcotic medicine. Then the article brings in a retired DEA agent to shill for the agency, which has notoriously never done a single thing wrong ever in their entire existence. Right. Anyway, he also says, quote, everybody is concerned about the increases in use of stimulants, not just the DEA and the FDA. Pause to read. So then a quote from a former deputy commissioner of the FDA, there is a fear that the overuse of prescribed amphetamines could lead to the equivalent of another opioid epidemic, which is another alarming implication that the DEA might start treating stimulant use as their next epidemic to fight. The article goes on to address how the shortage has affected people, and this quote I liked a lot. To many observers in the industry, concerns about the abuse of ADHD medications are outweighed by the harm done to the people with genuine diagnoses who can't access the pills they need to function. There's more. Pause to read. then this paragraph brings home the whole article for me because I'm genuinely concerned the DEA might turn stimulant usage into their new crusade in an attempt to get good PR to outweigh the bad PR of their supposed mishandling of the opioid crisis at the expense of those of us who rely on stimulants to function. Quote, "This isn't an issue where people are dying from Adderall. They're creating a fake epidemic," says Jack Titelman, a former DEA agent. And then finally, Ascent reveals that in the midst of all this, the FDA has been begging them to increase their production. Like, they've reached out multiple times, and all Ascent can do is be like, you got to talk to the DEA. So to recap, Ascent claims their infractions were only minor paperwork errors, and the DEA's response was disproportionate. The DEA claims that Ascent, quote, "did not accurately account for millions of doses of narcotics." I can't tell you which of them is telling the truth, if either one. What I do know is that this seems to be the first concrete explanation for any part of the shortage. I doubt the entire shortage can be blamed on the absence of Ascent's standard output of 12% of the nation's generic stimulant production, but surely at least some of it can. Whatever Ascent did or did not do to deserve being shut down, the fact remains that they were shut down, and 600 million doses of generic stimulants went with them. I do find it a little suspect that the DEA hasn't mentioned this at all when being grilled about the shortage. You think it'd be easy for them to explain that they shut down one of the ADHD med manufacturers, especially if their claims about Ascent's extreme misconduct with painkillers are true. Like, they could literally be like, this isn't our fault. These people were bad drug criminals, so we shut them down. And they haven't done that. And that feels like it would be like a softball pitch to, like, I don't know. So that makes me like, I don't know who's telling the truth, but that's weird to me. Anyway, I lost my place. All of that aside, it is terrifying to me that an ex-DEA agent would go on the record to say he thinks the DEA is, quote, direct quote, "creating a fake epidemic." Because it's entirely too plausible that they'd set themselves up for a home run and be like, it's the opioid epidemic all over again, but this time we'll win. The truth of the matter is prescription stimulants are not anywhere on the same risk level as opioids. They just aren't. But is that going to stop the DEA from treating them as though they are? Probably not. The DEA threw chronic pain patients under the bus, so why should people with ADHD and narcolepsy and other things that rely on stimulants be any different? That's all I got.
It was a really well-researched piece. I think it is absolutely ridiculous that the federal government is behind the Adderall shortage. That they're doing it because they wanted to win points for some reason by proving that, according to the article, that, you know, this company that manufactured the Adderall wasn't following all the proper procedures, and so because they weren't, they need to be shut down. Except this company handles 12% of all Adderall prescriptions for the entire country. That's a significant number of people who need their medication in order to function properly. In my opinion, one of the problems with government agencies like the DEA is they're filled with people who are ideologues. They believe in the mission so much that they don't allow any room for any other perspective. Among people who are completely straight edge, and if you work at the DEA, you have to be super straight edge. You have to be totally anti-drug. And in a culture like that, the amount of purity that you have is determined by, I guess I'll turn off the Morpheus cam. Your street cred, to a degree, is determined by how much you're willing to stay true to the ideas that you all hold dear. And in the case of drug enforcement agents, I'm sure that a lot of them think that people with ADHD are just faking. And they hate that these people are being prescribed a methamphetamine, something that they've dedicated their entire careers to wiping out. And I'm sure that they think that, it's just a scam perpetrated by the ADHD community on everybody else so that they can get free amphetamines. But, I mean, free amphetamines. No one's getting free amphetamines. Oh. All right, we've had some heavy stuff. So let's move on to things that are a little lighter.
I have lesbian feelings about the giant impact hypothesis. Now that everyone's thinking about the moon, have you ever wondered where the moon came from? The current leading hypothesis about the formation of the moon tells a story that goes like this. In the early days of the solar system, when the planets first coalesced from the excess matter of the formation of the sun, there were two planets this distance from the sun. One of them was what we call the early Earth, although its composition was pretty dramatically different from this Earth as we know it, for reasons that will be covered in this story. The other planet we have given the name Theia. According to the calculations that underpin this hypothesis, Theia would have been quite a bit smaller than the Earth, about Mars-sized. I was curious what a small planet means, so I looked up the surface area of Mars, and it's about 200 Texases or 1,000 Englands. For comparison, the asteroid that wiped out the non-bird dinosaurs and nearly wiped out all life on Earth was the size of Manhattan. The thing about massive objects is they are attracted to each other, and Theia and the early Earth were no different. They orbited the sun, but they also orbited each other, and with every pass, Theia grew closer. It was predestined, it was a matter of maths. From the moment these planets formed, Theia was going to fall into the Earth. And eventually, she did. The impact smashed both planets to pieces. It rent them to their cores, and as gravity did its thing, and the pieces came back together and the dust settled, what was left behind was one single larger planet and a satellite. And for as long as the Earth exists, there will be pieces of Theia in its core. I mean, listen, have you ever fallen in love? Because
I didn't know that about the moon. Morpheus, did you know that about the moon? No comment. He's not quite sure what I'm doing, and he doesn't know why a camera is being pointed at him. He likes his privacy.
To the kitchen, pour myself a cup of ambition and yawn and stretch and try to come to life. Jump in the shower and the blood starts pumping. Out on the street, the traffic starts jumping with folks like me on the job from 9 to 5. Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living. Barely getting by. It's all taking and no giving. They just use your mind. And they never give you credit. It's enough to drive you crazy if you let it.
That was fun. Now we have a couple of covers by a guy named Christian Beck.
Here come old flat top, he come grooving up slowly. He got juju apple, he won't hold it roller. He got hair down to his knees. Got to be a choker, he just do what it please, yeah.
Yeah, his covers are super short. I'm not entirely sure why. Well, I've been getting into TikTok a little bit, so I have kind of an idea why. If your videos are super short, you're more likely to get people to watch it multiple times.
She give me money when I'm in need. Yeah, she's a kind of friend indeed. No, I
All right, so he has a couple of original songs. Let's see how those are. Oh, he's on American Idol season 20. All right, so Come Together is his pin song. Good choice. What's this one?
Well, I was walking down the street and at the corner of my eye saw a pretty little thing approaching me. She said, I've never seen a man who looks so all alone. Could you use a little company? And if you pay
Well, that was good. I need to fix TikTok. Okay, this is an original.
I was born running from the law, running from myself, running from God above. Now I live running all the time, running from the troubles in my mind.
That's pretty good.
Damn, I just don't wanna be running from you. Damn, I spent my whole life running from you. I was born running from the law, running from myself, running from God above. Now I live running all the time.
Men who outwardly hate cats are the biggest fucking bitches, and I need to talk about it. I was just at brunch, and I overheard a girl talking about how she wishes that she could bring her cat to brunch like everyone brings their dogs to brunch, and like, respect. And some fucking man had to lean over from a different section of the table, and I was like, yeah, but cats fucking suck. They're such assholes. They don't do what you want them to do. Sir? Sir! It's fascinating to me that you think something is an asshole simply because it has boundaries. Because it doesn't want you in its business all the fucking time. And I do truly believe that a man who feels the need to interject on a conversation that he has absolutely no skin in the game for, hold on! Speaking of cats, look at that, I love that. But for you to interject on a conversation that literally you're not a part of, only to say, well, I don't like cats because they don't let me do what I want to do to them. Like, that's weird. Like, have you thought about why boundaries bother you? And like, fully, this man was like, very much like, I think all cats are evil and should die. And it's like, sir, jail. Actually, firing squad. This girl was literally like, well, have you ever had a cat? And he said, no! So how the fuck do you have this much emotions for that? Truth is, men are literally so emotional and like irrationally emotional, but they don't believe that rage and anger is an emotion. So they're like, yeah, fuck cats, I hate them! Only because at some point, a cat denied them. And they don't like to be denied anything because they're pathetic little bitches. Like, do you see how that's dangerous? It's dangerous as fuck. 4B movement.
I think that's really interesting. I agree that that's a red flag if someone thinks that cats are dicks just because they can't be manipulated. Um, let's see. I've had Morpheus since January, and it took him a little time to warm up to things, to warm up to me, but now he walks around like he owns the place, walks around demanding food. He's of the opinion that he's not fed nearly enough, and it's a tragedy, and it's only a matter of time until the word gets out and the public takes his side. That's his take on it, and that's what he tells me whenever we fight about it. What are you looking at, bud? What do you see? So, I love Morpheus, but we very much disagree on the food issue. And so when he gets hungry, he starts hopping up on counters. He starts being mischievous. He starts scrounging for food like he's a street cat. And, you know, it's not, he's not doing it because, you know, he's mad at me or anything. He's trying to get his needs met. And so he's going and hopping on counters and looking for food because he's hungry. And that's what cats do. They just kind of do what they want. And if you try to stop them, they're not going to understand. I have taken Morpheus off of the counters so many times, and he just shakes it off and he gets right back up 2 minutes later if that's what he decided he wants to do. When it comes to touching a cat, you really should only be touching a cat if they want you to touch them. And if you do something to a cat that they don't like, they have a way of letting you know. If I pet Morpheus, he'll start to bite me just because he has an oral fixation and he likes to bite. What is our next video? All right, this one is interesting.
So unless you're a young Earth creationist, you got to understand that human beings have been around on the Earth for like 100,000 years. And in that time, they've occupied a very similar type of living environment. That is, if you believe a guy like David Graeber, who writes about this and the dawn of everything, human beings have basically lived in the same environment for a very long period of time. And effectively, that was a very successful culture. They were hunter-gatherers. They lived in groups that didn't exceed probably a couple hundred people. And everybody you knew your entire life. And that group was so successful, they outcompeted other great apes at the time, like other species of humans, like Denisovans or Neanderthals. And it's interesting, right? Because a lot of evolutionary anthropologists believe that the reason that Homo sapiens outcompeted other like great apes at the time who looked like people, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, etc., is because we had larger groups that were able to work together in a way that they weren't. That is, that because of language and group size, we were able to handle issues that would have otherwise wiped out those groups of people, and ultimately did. And because we were able to communicate and solve lots of problems working together, that was what was able to happen. And flash forward thousands of years, and that's basically what we're still doing. I'm living in New York. This is a city of 8 million people, and every day the city gets up and works together in a bunch of different kinds of ways to solve all kinds of issues. That's why the world that we've created is the way that it is. Like, it's a miracle that human beings have been able to create all of this society around us. But one of the things that's very bizarre about it is that whereas in the past, you wouldn't have ever been lonely because you would have known everybody, you would have had a community. Today, it feels like that's kind of the symptom that most of us are dealing with. Like, if you're watching this in a westernized country, particularly in the United States, you're probably dealing with an epidemic of loneliness. You probably feel disconnected from most things in your life, and that's not just the US. Japan has an epidemic. The Scandinavian countries, including Norway, has a huge epidemic. That's why so many people are unaliving themselves. And it really is bizarre, actually, that human beings for such a long time were so successful because they lived in communities, that those communities which were that successful ended up expanding to the point where now we're not really members of them. Like, we are, but they're so big and abstract that you personally have almost no relevance to the people around you. If something happened to me, nobody in my building would know. Almost nobody I interact with on a daily basis. My bodega guy, the gym I'm a member of, like, they would be sad maybe, but like, it wouldn't impact their lives at all. They would just move on. Somebody else would move in. That's great, but that's made human beings redundant in a way that is actually impersonal and painful, and you live that experience without knowing that you're living it. And honestly, I don't know if there's a good solution. I'm not really sure who's writing about this. Everybody talks about there needs to be a return to kind of local communities so that people can feel involved and relevant. And I think that's probably true. If you get involved with like local government or a local nonprofit or something like that, you probably do feel like you're involved in something. But like, are people really going to do that? Who has time for that? I think instead your feelings of redundancy and alienation are accurate. And that's kind of weird to start with that premise, because if you're going to like a psychologist, they're going to try to tell you, well, you're not actually, like, this is just an illusion, or let's dig in and see where these feelings are coming from. They're coming from this. They're coming from the whole thing. They're coming from all of it. And as far as I can tell, the only way to really handle this is to get rid of the system of capitalism that is wanting people to become this atomized. And the fear that I think people accurately have is if we get rid of that system, all of this civilization comes crashing down, which is maybe true. I don't know if there's a good solution. Honestly, if you have one, I would love to hear it in the comments.
The solution to loneliness is multifaceted, and a lot of it has to do with, like he said, with capitalism. there's been a profit incentive to get people living in separate houses. I'm not expressing myself well. Around the world, it's really common for multi-generational households to exist. And that's not the norm in the United States. The norm is the nuclear family, which, has been horrendously out of date for decades, but that's neither here nor there. Capitalism is going to capitalism, and as things progress, there are going to be fewer and fewer spaces where we can do things in public without having to pay money. Those places are generally called third spaces, community centers, parks, things of that nature, places that are open to the public where anyone can go and you can meet people and it's not weird. Those places have been gradually disappearing over the past couple of decades. I don't know enough about the decline of third spaces to really talk about it intelligently, but I do know that that is a big part of it. America becoming less and less religious is another part of that, because if one of the benefits of a religious organization is the community, and if you are not part of a religious organization, then you're going to miss out on that. It's something that I miss from my own time with a religious organization, although I'm all right with that. Let's lighten things up a little bit in our final 7 minutes.
Good morning. This is an emergency message to the man I just walked past on Gates Avenue. You were holding a coffee, a bottled coffee that you clearly got from a bodega or a corner market, and you were drinking it, and it was a Chameleon cold brew concentrate. I don't think you know it's concentrate. It was the large format concentrate. I feel like you saw it and you were like, oh my god, wait, that's like such a big cold brew. I want that coffee this morning. You're drinking like 32 coffees, and you're a walking human time bomb. You're going to ruin the pants you were wearing, and they were like nice. They were like Bonobo slacks, not really my vibe or taste, but those are like running you like what, like $68? Let's not, I almost said something to you. Not every bodega does a good job of separating the concentrate bottles from the individual serving bottles, and you have fallen victim to that, but you are going to Kool-Aid man through a wall later if you don't stop drinking that. You can't be doing that. You're probably thinking, wow, this is really strong, this is a little bitter. Yeah, it's supposed to be cut with water. That's like 32 coffees. I need you to, part of me wants to turn around and go help him. If you were walking on Gates Ave, drinking a coffee in a white sweater and blue pants, that was concentrate. You were drinking concentrate. Okay.
Well, hopefully that poor person's okay. All right, so Morpheus, I really don't want my finger to be bitten right now, but I know if I put my hand up there, you're going to bite me. Is there any way we can negotiate a way out of this, or do I have to move you? He's looking down, almost like he's looking through the desk to where he knows my hand is. Because he has object permanence, that's why. All right, I'm moving you. Don't bite. I mean, it's a gentle bite, but it's still a bite. Ooh, savage. Look at that violence. Morpheus, be kind. Don't choose violence. Except he's a cat. Of course he's going to choose violence. I would just like to point out there is no cameraman. It's just, whoa, hey. All right, Morpheus, you're going to have to move. Okay, you're banished. I apologize for the violence. It was not part of the show format. If you feel impacted, please reach out. I'd be glad to offer my condolences, but that's about it.
Dubai is currently experiencing some of the worst flooding it's had in years after the government's been experimenting with cloud seeding to create artificial rain, which, as you can tell, has gotten out of hand. And while some people in Dubai have been enjoying the rain, for most people the flood and storm have gotten so intense that it's starting to break through the roof of most buildings, leaving massive amounts of people stranded in the roadway. And for those that are trying to get away, a lot of them are flooding their engines, leaving their cars stuck and broken in the middle of the road. Unless you've got a Tesla, then apparently that thing is a submarine. And it's gotten so bad that in the last 12 hours, Dubai's gotten more rain than they typically get in an entire year. Government officials in Dubai have told people to stay home and stay safe, but as you can tell, Dubai's infrastructure was just not built for this amount of rain. And sadly, it seems like the worst is yet to come, with a second storm coming and adding to the current one. This is today at 3 p.m. It should be bright outside, but as you can tell, the cloud cover is so thick that it seems like it's night. Now, how much of this is cloud seeding versus natural Mother Nature just taking its course? We don't know exactly, but I think it goes to show that you just do not want to mess with Mother Nature, because if you do, things can get out of hand very fast. But that's my opinion. What do y'all think?
Well, I think that with any early stage technology, you're going to have
For those
problems.
that are trying to get
Look at this. This is ridiculous. That is the desert. I think that any time that you deploy a new kind of technology, there are going to be problems. There are going to be kinks. But you really should understand weather patterns a lot better before you deploy experimental technology like this, because you very well run the risk of having massive flooding like this. But good for you guys. Good for trying something new. All right, and I think I will leave you with this video.
I'm going to say something so radical for a moment here, which is that if you are a creative, if you're an artist, if you make art, it doesn't have to be cutting edge. It doesn't have to be something that nobody's ever heard before. It doesn't have to be the best thing that somebody has ever heard for it to be worth making. What it should be is authentic, is an exemplification of the work that you've put into it and your taste and the things that you love about life and the things that you love about expressing yourself. I think this is just like my way of rebelling against like this notion of, oh, the industry has to be so exciting, everything's on TikTok now, you have to grab people's attention by doing this, that, and the other thing. And conflating that with the worth of actually just making something and feeling like it was worth making. Because if that shit makes you happy, it's worth making. And guess what? If you put out a couple stinkers, you can just keep making stuff. There's no cap. There's no limit. It's fine. It's cool. Everything's good, man. Sometimes.
I like that. And that actually sums up, why I'm doing what I'm doing. According to my little stream counter I see up here, I have 0 viewers, and I've had 0 viewers this entire time. So why am I continuing to go? Why am I continuing to record this? Because, like I said at the beginning, this is the kind of stuff that I would be doing if I was home by myself. I'm just saying my thoughts out loud instead of keeping them to myself like I do on other nights. I do believe that at some point, people are going to find this, and people are going to be, are going to see what I've done. And, I think some people out there will like it. But even if no one does, even if I'm the only person that likes what I'm doing, that's okay. 'Cause I'm having fun, and that is the whole point. One more video.
Life's not hard because you're doing something wrong. Life is hard because life is hard. Okay, so do no things. You don't have to fill all your time with doing things. Giving yourself a fucking break doesn't make you lazy. It sure as shit isn't selfish. Tired makes sense, and scared makes sense. This shit is hard. You better give yourself a hug and a kiss and an I love you right this freaking second. And you better keep it up, cutie, because I'm so freaking proud of you.
And on that note, I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great night.